Tom Golden, in honor of Men's Health Month, I want to talk about your book, The Way Men Heal, because I think it's probably one of the most important books for anyone to understand how men address grief, and especially wives, therapists. Everyone should read it.
Well, thank you, Martin. I appreciate that.
It's the follow on to your first book, which was Swallowed by the Snake. I'd like to talk about both of these, but let's start with the quick and easy read. Do you have a copy just hold up to show them the cover?
The Way Men Heal.
Yep, right there. There we go.
The first book I wrote was Swallowed by a Snake, The Gift of the Masculine Side of Healing. And it was a good book. Kubler-Ross liked it, and Robert Bly liked it, and Hope Edelman liked it, and a bunch of other people. And it was successful. But after a while, I started realizing there's been some research that's been done that wasn't in the first book, wasn't in Swallowed by a Snake. And also, that book is too long. I wanted to write something that was about 50 pages that summarized everything down into a easily digestible piece of a book. And that's what I did with The Way Men Heal. I think it's 58 pages, something like that. And you can read it like that. And it gives you the basics very clearly. And I love it. I love the little book. And men tend to like it too, because they don't want a missioner. I mean, when you're traumatized by something, when you're wiped out, you do not want to read 300 or 400 pages. 50 pages sounds good. And especially if it helps you understand what's going on in your life when you're in this chaos, you know?
Yeah, I think it's a very important read. And Tom, would you give people an idea of the very essence of it? Because one, it's had a big impact on my life from my father passing away and my mother passing away, and how it reassured what my instinct needed to do to feel more complete. That doesn't mean there isn't pain and I don't miss them, but to have more of a sense of moving them from alive to a memory in my heart.
I struggled when I first started working and doing therapy with people, with traumatized people. And I struggled because my caseload was primarily men for a couple of reasons we don't have to get into. It was mostly men. And I struggled. I didn't know what was going on because I've been taught in graduate school. You face each other, you make good eye contact, you talk about the past, you talk about feelings. And that worked great with women, not so good with men. And so it took me a number of years to see what was actually going on. That's what the book is about. It's what Swallowed by a Snake is about, too. It's about how men and women are very different in the way we process emotion. How do we process it differently? Because women's emotions, women's reaction to grief is easily seen. Usually it's crying, it's talking about it, it's being upset, but men's is not so easily seen. And that's because it's basically invisible. Most people don't see it. And so when you don't see something, you just assume it doesn't exist. Oh, it's not there. Well, it is there, but it's hidden from most people because it goes, men's healing usually goes through some sort of action or inaction. Either an action where they honor the loss in one way or another, or through inaction where they passively, quietly remember within themselves the things that are they're causing the grief. And through that, they're literally telling the story. I mean, that's what we want to do. Women, when they cry about it and they talk about it, they're telling the story of their loss. And men, when they use action or inaction, they're also telling the story of their loss. They're just doing it in a very different manner, in a way that people can't see. And, people can't see it because men don't want them to see it. And why don't they want them to see it? Because men live in a hierarchy. We live in a hierarchy where, if we show that we are dependent in some way, we go down a notch or two. People think less of us because of that. Men are pushed to look and appear independent. What is an alpha? An alpha male is someone who's completely independent. No one tells him what to do, you know? And so that's kind of the piece of masculinity is we're pushed into this hierarchy where we all try and strive for having as much status as we possibly can. And the book talks about how that happens. And of course, testosterone is a big part of it. We found out now that testosterone is not about violence and aggression. Testosterone is about striving for status. It's about what biologically pushes men to move into this action mode where we strive for status and we use that striving as a means to heal. But it's invisible because most people look at some man having some action and they think, "What's wrong with him? You know, why is he doing something? Why doesn't he sit down and talk about this crap?" You know, and there's lots of examples in both books, but in especially in The Way Men Heal, about men who this has happened to. One is Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton,
Oh yeah, that's great.
his son died, fell out of a skyscraper window in New York City. And what did Clapton do? Clapton, I don't think he went to therapy, but he said he did two things. He went to AA meetings and he played his guitar. And when he played his guitar, he wrote 3 songs during that time of great grief and chaos. And one was The Tears in Heaven, which most people know about. But there's 2 other, My Father's Eyes, where he was thanking his son for allowing him to see his father's eyes through his son's eyes because he'd never met his father. And then the third one was The Circus Left Town, which was literally a song about Clapton's grief. It was a song about how Clapton was telling his son, that one trip to the circus we took the night before you died, you're going to have to be the only one you're going to have. And if you can watch him play that on YouTube, and if you search The Circus Left Town, Clapton, go to YouTube, you watch him play it, how he doesn't blubber into tears. I don't know. The song is so powerful. But can you see how his action of writing that song was helping him to tell that story of his son's death and his own chaos within, what was happening inside him? So it's just a matter of how we tell the story. And men and women are basically different in that respect. And getting the eyes then to see that men have a different way to do it. Once you see that, then everything becomes more clear.
One of the things that I like you brought up is that in the biochemistry of us being estrogen versus testosterone, it's more like a bell curve of 80%. So this isn't like a black and white line, it's more like a continuum. And that's been very useful for me. It's like someone might have this, there might, could be a woman where this approach is more useful and another. So it's not like this, it's just black and white. And I want people to understand that because you give room for the diversity of life that exists. What I'd like you to do is, if you wouldn't mind, tell that one story of a man who lost his wife and did a carving. I think that's a beautiful example of doing.
Actually, that is on the cover here. You see the carving in the middle. That's Clapton's guitar. That's Michael Jordan's basketball. And in the middle, the carving is of this man's wife. And after his wife died, the man plopped a block of walnut down on the family's kitchen table. And he proceeded over the next year or two to carve his wife. And so his children watched as their mother appeared on the table. Just a beautiful, beautiful story. But can you see how that man, this is an activity he did, and by every time he took a chunk out of that, he was thinking of his wife. He was there with his wife. He obviously teared up as he was making it. You know, he was processing his loss in the same way someone might process their loss in a support group, you know, but he chose to process it by doing this carving, a beautiful, beautiful carving. You know, the thing about the men's action is it's not just action that helps men heal. It's action when you pair it with honoring. So he was honoring his wife by doing that carving. Clapton was honoring his son by doing those songs. So almost always you'll see with men, they'll have an action, but the action is connected to some sort of honoring. You know, and the two together are powerful. That's what makes both working together very powerful and healing. You know, because it means something. It has meaning to the men and to the women. You know, I was going to say the very first page of The Way Men Heal, first paragraph, I talk about how this is not a men woman thing. This is a human thing, and actually the book is not about all about men versus women. It's all about how can you tell when someone has an active mode of healing or a passive mode of healing. And because everyone's different, there are going to be women who are going to grieve in the same way that the men do, and there are going to be men who grieve in the same way that women do. I think it's about 20% of each are like that. So we need to honor those people just as much as the people who do the standard way of healing. You know?
One of my favorite stories of experiencing it, I've experienced it so many ways. I'll share some of them, but one was I remember a friend that I've known since apparently we met pre kindergarten in a sandbox. Our parents met.
Good.
I was visiting, and his dad had passed away, and his wife said, "You know, he's the rock, and he hasn't grieved." And I said, "Yes, he has." She says, "What do you mean?" Because she knows I've always been more emotional of the two of us. Okay, if you put us together, and I said, "Come here," and what has he done since his dad died? And she said, well, all he's done is completely re-landscape the backyard. And Tom, I can barely tell this story without getting choked up. I mean, it was so profound. And I said, it just came to me. I said, where did he play with his father? And you could see she saw it. That was his grieving. And it doesn't mean he had to be conscious of it. You might have asked him, he goes, I don't know, I just wanted to do it. Doesn't have to explain it. It's just, it was clear to me, knowing your material, that was his grieving right there.
Yes. Yeah, it reminds me of a woman who came up to me after a workshop I gave. She said, Mr. Golden, can I tell you a story? I said, sure. She said, and she told me this story about how after her mother died, her father and three brothers tore the house apart. They redid the entire house. She said, I thought they were crazy until I came to you today. Now I know what they were doing. They were redoing the house the way the mother wanted it to be. They were doing it in honor of the mother. Oh, oh, just beautiful. Men have the most beautiful actions they do. I mean, and people don't see them. They don't connect the dots. So once you see this, you start connecting the dots. You start taking your hat off to men, saying, "Yes, that's a really good way to tell your story and to grieve."
That's why this statement of, oh, it's great that you're getting men in touch with their feelings and their grieving. No, no, no. Why don't we assume there's an actual natural method that we've written off that we can't see, that's always been there, but no one was paying attention? Because we can go on about the intolerance of our society of men's pain, but that's another conversation. I made a video about this month, and I said, if you see a man in pain and you say, how are you doing? He might give an answer, I'm fine. Because a lot of men have learned if they share their feelings, someone might use it as a tool against them, especially in a relationship in the future. So they are reluctant. And I'm not sure there isn't some wisdom in that, Tom. You got to find a safe place to do it. And that's where the key I said is, if you see a guy that's hurting, maybe what you ought to do is, if you've done something fun together, invite him to do it. If you played golf, do that. If you've bicycled together, do that.
But shoulder to shoulder, shoulder to shoulder is the key. Don't think you need to sit down and talk about it face to face. You know, do something together where you're shoulder to shoulder, and the chances are things will come up. If they don't, that's okay too. You're gonna have a good time together.
Yes, and the biggest problem is that sense of I'm completely isolated. That's where people go down an area where they do something where they can't recover from. And that's, to me, really important with veterans and everything else, is isolation. So,
Yeah, and one of the little sections in the back of the Way Men Heal is what can you do for men who are grieving? Because that's what everybody wants to know. What can you do? What you can do is take action in honor of the person who died. So if a man's father died, the man and the father loved baseball, the wife could go to the man and say, I'd like to take you to the game on Friday night in honor of your father. What do you think? That's grief. That's grief right there. He would immediately see that the wife was honoring his father. He'd immediately see that she understood him in a way that he didn't think she might have before. And they could go to that game in honor of his father together and be there shoulder to shoulder. He didn't have to talk about it. In fact, you make sure to tell her, don't make him talk. He doesn't have to talk. He may say something about his dad. If he doesn't, that's okay too. Just go and be together and enjoy each other's company in honor of his dad. That's powerful healing right there, Martin. People don't see it, But there's lots of ways you can help men. That's just one of the ways.
For me, with my father's passing, I contacted the funeral home and I said, first of all, he passed in his home. And I said, I want you to hold the body before it goes to Pennsylvania. Can you do that? Because I wanted to go up and be present to his passing. And they said it's unconventional, but we can do it. I said okay, and I drove up to DC, and I went into as a holding area. It wasn't some glamorous area, and I said I'd like to see him. And I spent time with his deceased body, and looking back, that was so powerful because. Tom, we've talked about how men used to be. That was their job when someone passed away. They dug the hole, they were involved in it. Okay, well, I'm not going to do that. What can I do? And that was so important. I did it. And I was just there and with him. And then I remember talking to the guy at the funeral home. I said, I'm going to ask you an unusual question. I want to know everything you've done to prepare him and get him in the ground. And that wasn't like everyone needs to do it, but I trusted my instinct. What's the closest thing I can do to be more active? And he said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, I want to know." And it was for me, again, not everyone needs to do it, but he went through the whole process of preparing him, what they do and how they prepare the site. And then it was important too that I asked a number of the men to be pallbearers and stuff involved in it. And it's such a beautiful sight. I have a picture someone took of us all proudly carrying the casket from the car. I didn't want the men there to do it. I wanted the men I knew to do it.
Yes.
And I don't know what their response is, but I know it's still active part of me because we've gutted our society of so many things that were important to men to support their grief because we didn't even know this.
Our country, 1850 and on, our country shifted dramatically. Funerals were in the home before that. And men took care of the body. They took care of digging the grave. They put the casket together. They did everything and gave the eulogy. Now men don't have anything to do with that, which is really dangerous because if men use action, the actions have been stripped. They've been subcontracted to somebody else, which leaves men standing in a funeral home, tapping their feet, feeling uncomfortable, you know?
And being asked how they're feeling.
Yes. Can't you talk about your feelings, please? Just a little bit?
The other thing was, through it, I found out he had been in the military, able to get an honor guard to come and do a salute with the flag. Of course, I was truly a basket case when they handed me the flag. That was that. But all of these things, it's the actions. What do you need to do to honor? This has been the most valuable thing, and I think everyone should just buy your book and read it because there are men in their lives. And then I do want to say you also have a book on helping mothers raise sons. And this Tom, this is one I really bugged you. You were doing it anyway, but wanted it done because in the years of leading a men's group, I can't tell you how many mothers said they would call me and they say, I know how to fight with my daughter, but I have no roadmap for my son. I mean, I might have heard that 100 times. And I said, there needs to be something in it. And they need to understand because it's another thing absent in our education, in our society. But this to me goes hand in hand because we have a lot of young men in grief too. And if mothers could learn the way of connecting to their sons in a way that works for them, it's not going to be what their estrogen based system would assume in most cases.
Correct. That's probably true.
Again, this is Men's Health Month. And Tom, thanks for what you're doing. You not only have this book, you have the other book, and then you do consulting with therapists, right? That want to understand this better. They can hire you to get some one-on-one coaching on it because I met so many men that I knew have gone through social work and they said we were not taught this. I mean, in the last 10 years.
It's crazy. And I do still see people online in consultations for grieve and stuff.
Yeah, to work with you as well, virtually. Excellent. Okay, so where can they get this great book?
Amazon.
I'll put the link below and let's get the conversation going. I have my own book coming out, Taboo, The Lost Codes of Men, and that should be out to release before Christmas, but let's get this conversation going. I just want to challenge people that maybe we collectively have an unconscious bias to not hear men's pain, and that this shifting could make a profound effect on boys, fathers, and especially wives and women.
Sounds good to me.
Good. Thanks, Tom. This was great.
You're welcome, Martin. Thank you. We'll see you.